Hello.
Hello, hello.
Let's see. I'm in the dark.
It's funny, the cameras are so good now at like fixing the light in a room that often the people in the room feel more darkness than the people who are on the phone call with them.
Yeah, but like I literally have nothing. Well, I have the other screen, but if I click this button, oh, there you go. I have influencer lights.
Nice.
Oh, let's see. I opened the thing and then I took. Oh, come on. There.
Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Just let people have a few minutes of coming online while I also get my screen sort of shareable. All right. Hello, all. Cool. Welcome, everyone. How's everyone doing?
Pretty well.
Cool, cool.
Marsh, I didn't think you were going to make it.
One of my 4 conflicting meetings canceled.
Ah,
Yeah,
So we made
it
it
was a
to
bad time for
second
me.
place. Yeah, boy. Thank you for coming.
I have to drop in an hour, so but I'm here for the start.
Fair. It's a long time, right? But it's just sort of trying to give the space for people to come and go as they need to, and yeah.
And
appreciate
I
it.
had actually hoped to make some progress on content, but made none in the last week. So sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's, as I say, it's so for context, I think people will be familiar with this, but just in case, this is the second of the deep dives. So welcome to new faces, and you haven't missed any if you were at the first one to familiar faces. The first one helped us to, I think the phrasing I kept using was the direction of travel. So I think it helped us understand the kind of intention behind some of the words that were on the model. And I would say my takeaway from that hour, those 2 hours, and other people might have different ones, was that I felt we were all vaguely on the same page about direction of travel, the intention, the hope, the goals of creating a model, and the things that we thought might be valuable. Now, when it came to what are the things we most want to highlight, what are the words we think best describe those things that we want to highlight, those still had some discussion to be had. But I felt very good that I felt like we weren't at odds with each other on what we were trying to achieve. So my thinking coming out of that was, that's great, but it's really hard to wordsmith something, and especially when I think we still had as much sort of opportunity for discussion as we still had in the air. So what I want to do is give space for people who think maybe a little bit differently to have the chance to think broadly and globally and fresh blank slate orientedly, to say, okay, take all the inputs we have, the existing model that's a little bit marked up that's in the document right now, as well as the discussion we had for those couple hours, and take that and say, what is it that you heard? What is it that if you had to design a shared model that you think people would agree on, what would it look like? So that we can start to maybe address where we are still divergent better, and maybe identify more of where we are already aligned clearly better as well. So the idea for this meeting is that the second link I sent, I think some people maybe joined after I sent it, is to a Google Drive. This Google Drive was open for if anyone wanted to share anything, but to your point, Marsh, like you didn't have to. Like coming into this meeting, you don't have to have created your own from scratch model. It's just an opportunity, as I say. Different people think different ways, and I'm trying to like encourage and enable people to participate depending on how they think. So in this right now, what you'll see is we have I will actually rename this right now. So we have a document that is labeled 0.initial draft. We have a document that is labeled 1. Just to try and namespace this a little bit, which was so 0. is the thing that we started with back in like April. 1. is the thing that we ended with at the end of our last call together. And then anything else that's in there from, looks like there's 4 other things, are ideas that people dropped in today. So what I'd like to propose is that the first thing that we do is we do maybe, I don't know, at least 5 minutes, and it may stretch to 10 minutes of independent reading of the things that are in there. And the things I'd like to come out of that independent reading time is, where do you think that there are huge alignment and like clear things that we want to see be true in the final state of the model? And where do you still see that there's concern that like people are sort of in different camps and uncertain like where we might land? So basically I'm looking for trends is basically what I'm trying to say, is that more so than I like, and yes, you can also start to pick out if you're like, oh, I really liked that word, or I really liked that phrasing or whatever, but that's not going to be the first level of conversation. The first level of conversation is going to be trending. Then we're going to find out if we feel like there's one model that we can start to converge on and then deep dive on wording of, or if we need to start from a fresh model or whatever. So we'll find that out. How do people feel? It's a little bit made up. It is pre-planned, but also a bit, made up, this facilitation technique. So if you think there's a better way of doing things, or you think it won't work, please do shout now. Before we waste anyone's time. I don't want to do that.
It's a great direction.
Agreed. What I'm wondering is if we pick one of these documents and all read it, or if the person who wrote it is able to speak about what makes it, what the direction was that they took, I think that might help us organize in the short term.
Cool. So the proposal then, if I hear you correctly, Marsh, is that instead of doing independent reading, what we do is we do group reading, essentially. We go through them all, and we kind of that. Cool. So I can do a screen share. So what I am going to suggest that I do, let's see.
Here's why I suggested, by the way, is that I think it's hard to understand the differences, to hold in your head what the starting point was and what the contributor tried to play with. I think if we can just like help people orient around what the germ of the doc might be, that would be helpful to me at least.
Cool. Cool. What I'm going to do here, I'll share my screen now. There's no point in holding off. It's a big screen. I apologize if that is. I will try and do a better zoom for it. What I'm thinking is that, so I've created a new document. It's inside that same folder, so everyone should have access to it and write access and all of that. So please shout if there's any issues. But what I'm thinking is I will basically keep notes, and just like I was saying, what I'd like to get to is like, I'd like to get to a point where we are starting to identify like characteristics we want and things that we still need to kind of have time to debate. And then sure, if there's like something that everyone's like, I love that word, we can throw it into general notes and we can worry about that later. But I'm trying to like not quite get into that detail right from the get-go. Any other suggestions? I think that's a really good one, Marsh. I think that'll help a lot. Anyone else have any other suggestions for how to make this as useful for people as possible?
I think, and I'm sure you're about to clarify, but like making sure that we have time, because I know that I've only got an hour as well. I think just like it's tough to like, well, I want people to be able to say what they want to say, but also not do too much. So I think some type of time limit would probably be wise.
Awesome. What I'm gonna do then is there a timer on max? There are not. Of course there's not. Cool. What I'm gonna do is just throw that down there so that I can be bad about cutting anybody off, including myself. And so what I'll do is I'll set a timer for each of these. And so we've got what Robert, is this one that you have put in as well? I just want to try and count.
No, I think I'm the last one who opened it, or
Oh, it opened. It became a
Yeah.
doc. There.
May I-
So
I was gonna say, if I may make a suggestion, if Ram is here, I think Ram is on the call. There's a maturity model deck that I think is the most dramatic new direction of a quick scan I did of the documents that we have to work from. And so maybe it's a good way to sort of break out of the thinking we've had been going on and kick off the morning. Does that work for people?
that works. Rom's here. So I'm gonna set an 8-minute timer to start. What we care about is bottoming out conversations, but it'll give us a good gut check of like, you know, where we're at to be able to try and get to all the different models as well as some open conversation at the end. So so the one I think we're opening here is this doc deck here. So yeah, Rom, do you want to talk us through some of this, and I can go wherever it is you think is best.
Sure. So what I have in there is not dramatically different from where I think the team ended at the end of the last deep dive. What I started off with was just ways in which to label the different pieces that were in the table that were already there, and just kind of rewrite and refocus some of the bits that I felt were overlapping a little too much. So I just thought I'd separate things out into specifically wanting to focus on the core, I think, characteristic that we had. I felt that the characterization sort of started to overlap into some adjacent areas, which I didn't find all that necessary. But it's essentially a retelling of this exact same story that the team ended with. And I just thought, you know, if we were going to publish this and get this in front of more people, obviously, the visualization and just telling the story individually about each of the pieces might be useful. And so that's the real direction in which I thought I'd go. And so there ended up being like 7 different characteristics. So I just thought I'd rainbow the shit out of this presentation. And, so the 7 so-called characteristics were, I think, you know, broad enough to cover all of the different areas, but also make sure that nothing was missing. So I didn't feel the need to necessarily add another category or things like that. I did rename 1 or 2 of those, but you know, it's essentially all there. So in my mind, there's no single place to start this discussion or start with the maturity model. So it's very cyclic. It's very different in terms of what path each team could take or what starting point each team could what are those stepping stones, because for some teams it might come from like an engineering need to create platforms and things like that, whereas for other teams it could be something that comes from leadership or management, however you want to call them, the suits basically. And so depending on how that comes and where it goes and what sort of blockers it takes, the platform journey could happen in one of many ways. That's really the story that I tried to frame around this slide. And then it goes on into like different pieces from slides 4 through 10, just each of those 7 areas broken down into individual sort of headings or characteristics. The topmost one being the most mature, and then reducing in maturity as we go down the pyramid sort of. I like the idea of the pyramid because, and especially for explaining this maturity model and its different stages, because there's obviously a lot that's going on and a lot of busy work for teams that are less mature, versus platform wise, there's a lot less in terms of confusion, in terms of overhead, in terms of toil, and in terms of stuff that people are doing as they go up the chain in terms of maturity. I've intentionally left the zenith or the peak out because I don't think we've hit that yet, and so it's just aspirational to just leave it there. So we can go through these individually very quickly, maybe. So slide 4.
I'd be
Please.
keen. So this is where I was wondering if,
Yeah.
so I can tell you my bias, and other people may go, we just go side by side. But my bias would be to grab the like top level ideas from these and throw them into this table you started on 12, so that we can get the
Correct.
like overlay.
Correct.
And then of course, like the details is where the interesting bits are, like that.
Correct.
We've always said that our intention is to get to sort of a longer form explanation of each of these one words, but the one words can give us that visible. So I don't know, I can grab like strategy and pull it down. And if anyone else wants to grab one and pull it
I was going to
across.
do this in the 5 minutes of reading time that we were going to have.
We threw you under the bus.
That's okay. But essentially, people can go over what is there and grab each of it. Let me also do a couple.
So one thing is reminding me of is that the thing I've gone back and forth on is like what are some of the traits we see at these different stages and categories, the different cells in the table, and the other is what are the kinds of problems you're dealing with at those levels, and feels like I don't know which one to prefer there. Both are interesting, and maybe it's good to think about them in those terms. Like what is the nature of the problems or the challenge that you face in there, and what are the kinds of examples you would see? In other words, how do I know where I am on this chart? Well, do you have a sort of place where people can go to find out what developer tool chains exist, that kind of thing.
Right.
I also added a slide. You're free to delete it, please. But on slide 4, it struck me as you were showing the cyclic diagram that there's like a radar chart might be a good way to understand. Like you're going to make progress in each of these areas in different ways, and it seemed like a good way to sort of visualize your progress.
I think so too. The radar chart is probably what the outcome would be if anybody's looking for like a self-evaluation exercise of sorts as they're going through this.
Yep.
I think that I'm a big fan of the spider chart, radar chart style. I think that where they come in really helpful is when there is like groupings of things. So you can sort of say like you're this shape. So one thing is like as a engineer, there's like sort of leadershipy skills, technical skills, interpersonal skills, and you can sort of group them a little bit, and you can start to say that, and there's like front end skills and back end skills. And you can sort of say like a human who is a senior kind of usually fits this sort of a shape, and versus a human who's a like principal might be more this kind of shape. So we've just hit the 8 minutes, so I just want to call that out. But we've got this table, so let's maybe take a minute and have a think about how people if there's any, so I'd love to hear. So thank you for the intro, Ram. If it'd be good to continue here. So I started making notes under characteristics we want in the final model and realized that that's probably a bit presumptuous. So I went to general notes, but this is where I'd love to hear people who responding to what they're seeing from Ram and what they were themselves thinking and proposing. What is it that we'd like to see in the final model? What is it that you're still uncertain about and things needs more discussion? Yeah, would love to hear people's reactions.
I'll start then. One thing I'm trying to balance in my head as I interpret what you've done, Ram, is enablement and adoption. They feel connected somehow. I'm not sure about value chain and financial, but also similarly, like, to me, what are you investing and what are you getting out on the other end? And then there's I'm not quite sure the difference between interaction and integration. I haven't grokked that yet, but it's like, are these the right categories here? Can we lump any of them? That's where I'm struggling to interpret some of this and wrap my head around it.
Marsh, is that me hearing you that the thing I started typing right at the beginning, this whole idea of avoiding overlapping, that our goal, like we have a goal of avoiding overlapping between characteristics, and what that means, we don't know yet. Like we might still have that happening, but Ram, I heard that from one of the principles you are working from for this document, and Marsh, I'm hearing that from you in review of the document.
It's a good call out.
Like that sounds like a thing we would like to achieve at the end when we're doing a final review, that we feel good that they're fairly independent.
Yep.
Aspects. Okay, cool.
Does that make sense to you, Ram? Or others?
Yeah. As I was writing this, there definitely felt that there was some overlap. We could probably do a better job of renaming some of these, provided there's some really unique characteristics. We could also do a merge of some of these, but just to quickly clarify, the integration stuff I think was in my head more in terms of here's a technical sort of two technical products that I need in order for my app to work, let's say, and then we're now in the marketing era of app aware platforms and platform aware apps and things like that. But to me, it's more of here's a platform, and this platform is capable of integrating with X and Y and Z natively, as opposed to the devs or the SRE folks having to do something additionally, versus lower down the chain, it is there are these capabilities that the app needs, go figure it out yourself. So that's what I thought integration is, versus for interaction, it's more about how consumers of the platform interact with the platform itself in general. So how do I get on board? Where do I start? How do I push to a remote instance? What have you? So I imagine them to be slightly different things. The enablement versus value chain, I think that's a little more tricky to really understand. But yeah,
Sorry, I was lumping enablement and adoption together. That's how it was in my head, trying to make sense of the categories. That's okay. That's okay.
There's definitely
describing
some areas of overlap. I don't deny it. So.
The idea here, I think, is to be divergent, and like how are we not seeing things, and what's another way to approach the problem? Because in order to converge, sometimes you got to diverge, and I think that's the stage we're in.
Exactly.
Is that right, Abby?
What we're trying, that's what we're trying to identify, where we're still we definitely diverged in the last call, I think, and what we're trying to figure out is where are we still at that, and where can we, when can we reasonably converge, right? Definitely.
So I thought this was fun. I think in the interest of time and socializing ideas, we should try to stay somewhat high level on each of the
Yeah.
different bodies of work. So
Yeah,
may
I think
suggest
that,
we move to the next one. Yeah.
yeah, Victor, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, it's I mean the one existing one model, we already gone into a lot of details, so we understand that pretty well. The new one is hard to really digest that in such a short time. Should we still use the previous existing table as a base and see whether we can merge this new, just compare cell by cell, whether they can map to the existing table?
So I think that I think to Marsh's point, if we can get through then like where people are thinking, like what are the big takeaways? Like I think the biggest thing I see from Rom's description of his was we want to avoid the overlapping characteristics, even if that's not been 100% successful in his attempt. Like that was something he was trying to like challenge us, like challenge the existing model on. I think the other really big thing I'd like to call out from Rom's piece of work that I think is really valuable is the like challenge on what the right visualizations look like. And again, whether or not we end up with exactly what's in the slide deck or something else, it's like I think that's to me the things that I've noticed you, Rom, were both talking about and displaying in the fresh ideas you brought. Is there anything you or anyone else feels like that we haven't captured? And I do see you, Vishal, sorry. I don't want to talk over you.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I had just two small inputs. I agree that some of the ideas are overlapping, but I was also thinking from a very consumer's point of view. If you follow the Minto's pyramid principle, more than 3 to 4 things are very hard to remember. Probably 6 or 7, too much to remember. So at some point we should think of that as a limit. Obviously, it doesn't have to be the only constraint. And one minor thing, I think strategy B has to be at the top right in this table, because strategy is what follows financials, follows value chain. Like strategy at the bottom seemed a little like
Yep. Cool. That's a great point on the number. I think I put that down as general notes. I think maybe I should put that down in open questions. I think maybe is a better place, because I think we've been sort of dancing between up to 7 down to maybe 4 or 5, and what is it in between there? But what is the right numbers? I think a good question, open question. All right, so maybe what I'll suggest is, yep, go on, Marsh.
So I was just going to add to your 2 points. I thought I was giving thumbs up to both the points you made, Abby. I would also add that I think it was fun to approach it from the slides perspective, because we do have a challenge of breaking this down to be consumable by people who are trying to understand the space, and so it was nice to see it presented in that way too.
Cool.
How we organize and present this is going to be a fun challenge.
Absolutely. Awesome. Cool. I think I will, I've already tried to, so because I'm the one that was thinking about the format of this meeting, which is unfair, sorry you all. I definitely have addressed mine in a way that I've tried to like focus on that as an outcome. And so giving other people a little bit of time to think about what they're thinking about, and be able to display that. Maybe I'll go next and I'll set the timer and try and go. I think so. This is the table rethink based on me, based on what I was thinking. I've tried to note down here what are some of the things that I was trying to address in my own head of like that compares a little bit with where we've been and where we're going and so forth. So I think making sure like we've got Simon here and Colin here who've been both working with the cloud native maturity model, and like making sure that we acknowledge like we are talking about platforms is I think really important. And I think in the last call we started elevating the conversation to really interesting topics, but we have to decide. I'm not declaring, but in retrospect I was thinking, I wonder if we are veering away from the like the area we are the platforms working group. We are talking about platforms. Platforms might not be the right thing for every company or every problem, but that is the problem space we're working in. Are we veering too far away from that? Was a question I had in my head. we talked a lot about naming columns, and I felt really uncomfortable with that for a long time. So that's why I challenged myself to do it. And where I landed through a conversation with a colleague was like, as long as they all sound like things you wouldn't be upset about being in. And ad hoc is the only one I'm less sure of right now, but all of these are sort of like, they are valid. They are not offensive. And I think that was sort of something I was thinking about. They may not be perfect names, but that was something I was thinking about. And I also focused a lot on, if we're going to give them names, I think that enables us and almost requires us to think a little bit more about what that movement between columns might look like. And so I tried to put movement in, like, what are the things that you need to do to achieve the next column? I couldn't get away from asking a question per row. I thought that was, I actually at one point only had questions. I didn't have the one word like summaries. And I felt like the questions is really, if we want people to be able to self-evaluate and like introspect, I think the questions is really helpful. So I maintained that, and I think that was high value. A major change is that I've introduced, so this has this has 6 items. So to your point, Vishal, about number of things, but I've tried to divide it from a perspective. So I started to realize that like builders and providers think differently than consumers. Providers need to worry about what consumers think, but there is like a difference there, and maybe that would help with memory or with like focus. I don't know. And then the last one was that I think some of our items in the maturity model were unintentionally, but they were kind of implementations. Like even things like platform as a product, like as uncontroversial as that might be within this group, like there's an argument that that's like a thing, right? Like that you're implementing. And so I tried to stay away from that. I think the one place where I really fell over on that was responsibility matrix. But I'm sure there's other examples of where I didn't do a great job of that principle, but that was, so these are the things, the principles I was trying to keep in mind. And I will shut up so y'all can read and respond.
So
think,
I actually copied, go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead, John. I think
Or-
Rob can go
or I can-
next. Yeah.
Okay, so I actually copied this as kind of like a starting point for me to draft out some stuff. And a couple of things that I just want to say I really like is the different paradigms of perception that you have, like looking at it as a platform customer or consumer, and then the provider. And then I also like the movement aspect of it. Like, okay, well, I'm at level 1 or ad hoc or whatever. How do I, like, what do I need to do? Like, what do I need to focus on to get to the next level with any given thing?
Yeah, +1. I like that. Great call out.
Cool. I might pull those across to the doc, but I'll just star them there for now as we're talking. That's 2 votes, so they'll probably come over to the doc. Ron, what were you thinking?
Yeah, I was going to say that the fact that you had a question that anchors every category is great. I think it really centers it works very well to anchor the idea and really reinforce each of the different categories and what we are actually aiming for each of the individual sort of areas. I really love that. And the fact that the category on the right builds up on the category on the left, and it shows a very clear market progression, I think is also super. The progression is much more visible and transparent compared to the older version, is what I wanted to say. So if we could incorporate these two
So you're
ideas
saying
back in
from ad hoc to like introducing the ad hoc established operationalized, like that has added clarity. Is that, I just want to make sure I know what you mean by the right and the left.
correct.
Correct. Cool.
I just want to say that I agree with that. I also, you were talking about removing like the titles. I think the questions make kind of the category, it explains it. but I don't think we will gain anything from removing or not having a title for it, because we need to reference it somehow, and we can't
like a
reference a long question, or it's not long, but it's a sentence. I think not necessarily having like number of levels makes sense. I think I'm not 100% sure about the words used, but it makes sense. But for instance, I think at least like established and operationalized makes sense. And the last two, or the first and the last, it's slightly like I'm not totally sure, like I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about those words that I think it doesn't sit right with me somehow. I'm not sure why.
Wait, sorry, just out of curiosity, which words? Were
So ad hoc and thriving.
Yep.
Like as a starting point being ad hoc and thriving being the last, like you could thrive.
I struggled with the last one.
you could if it's operationalized, you could still thrive if that's where you want to be. Like if that makes sense to you, you feel like everything is cool. Like it's kind of,
you're right.
It's a hard word.
That whole like trying to have them all be in a positive place. I think it's a good point that like it makes it feel like that is the only place to be, like, and that's not at all, like that goes against my principle and that's why I wanted to share the principles as much as the words, because like I'm not pretending like the words are all perfect. So cool. No, that's a really good point. I think I had already called out ad hoc, but I think thriving is an equally challenging one on that. Yeah, Marsh, go for it.
Yeah, riffing on that, operationalized is the word I struggled most with in that list. I still feel as if there's levels 1 and 3 are unstable, and either you fall back from there or you make the leap to levels 2 or 4. That may just be me, but just feel like there's something fundamentally different in nature. It's like you're going from push to pull, and so I don't know how to describe it better than that, but I left a comment on that cell.
Amazing. Yeah, have a bit of a deeper look.
Again, I thought about, so I like the way you've organized it here, the qualities, I think, in each of the cells. And I started thinking about, again, what are the traits, what's the evidence you might see of this? How might you see this in your organization? Things that'll help you orient, these are probably the wrong ones. The first things I thought of were like, do you have coding standards? Do you use architectural decision records? Like, what are some of the things that are, indicators that you are in fact accomplishing what that cell describes? So separate exercise,
interesting.
to figure out what that would be.
Yeah, so there's two things. So I've added stars to these where it sounded like it. So A, I wrote these as something that I valued, and B, I heard at least 2 other people in the group value them. So that feels like we're starting to grow. So I'd like to propose that these 4 principles come across, and they are that we try and name the columns, and that if we like in naming them, we keep them in a positive place. Like, we're not trying to tell you if you're not level 4, then keep going because you're useless. Like, that's not where we want to be. That we want to talk about the movement between columns, and that is a part of the model, is like, how do you get, and this is where you're talking about push and pull, Marsh, and things like that. That we like having the question for each row to give that clarity and give people the way of playing to it, and that we like the idea of keeping personas of provider and consumer like visible somehow. And it may not be this, like, it may not be that there's 3 categories for producer and 3 for consumer, but like, how do we like encourage keeping that? Does anyone want to suggest against any of those? Or yeah, okay.
I like all of them. None of them I disagree with. I think they're all worth adding.
Anyone else have any concerns with any of those, or want to propose something else that they've seen? Yeah.
I was typing a quick one. I put a note in there that I still prefer the cloud native maturity model terms as far as neutrality and just kind of how that works. There was a comment in there too. I like about the numbers. I do like having the numbers as a way to refer back and just infer that they progress in an order. But So just a reminder, the terms there are build, operate, scale, improve, and optimize as we go from left to right. And one of the thoughts that I was having was the discussion in the cloud native maturity model the other day was kind of around it being the cloud native model being a central hub that can then guide people to the other models like the platform maturity model. And I was just thinking that our ad hoc here really lines up with operate at their level. And I could almost argue that if I'm using the cloud native maturity model, that I'm not quite ready for a platform strategy unless I've progressed to that kind of the operate stage. There's a little bit of wiggle room there. But I could, if I was thinking about how to align the terms, I would probably basically start with like our ad hoc is the equivalent of their operate. And that might be a good way to align with the same terminology, but that was my thought there. Simon, I don't know if you have a comment in addition to that.
Yeah, well, first off, I really like what we've been discussing here. I do see a similarity, like as Collins mentioned, with operate being at the ad hoc level. I really agree with that point. We within the cloud native maturity model, the first level is pre-production, and for me it seems the start's at production. So I think that's a really good point. If I may very quickly add, a word that came to my mind actually for a heading for operationalized, funnily enough, was modern. I don't know, it's just one observation. I also really liked, sorry if I may hijack as well, the progression, row number 1. I really like that, the movement. Oh, right. I think the questions are fantastic, and I really like the 2 personas that are reflected here as well.
So
yeah.
I would say that's enough votes. I think I'm going to pull these over to things that we are talking about, wanting our characteristics to hold. And like, as I say, these are all, none of this is ever written in stone. It's just sort of stuff we want to kind of challenge ourselves to think about as we're coming into a more approachable model. Sorry, I saw your hand go up and down. I was going to go to your model next because I know there was timing. I don't want to. Yeah. Is that fair? Is there something else you want to say here?
Yeah, that was perfect. I can.
Yours? Okay.
And I can kind of hit on what I was going to say in mine as well.
Awesome. Then that's what. So if you're following along at home, go ahead and open up the Asari one, and then I'm going to scroll down to here. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, but I should have just deleted everything. But yeah, this is it.
Cool.
So yeah, I didn't get to go too far into it, so obviously that's why it's blank in the middle. I was just trying to get just a better, like just kind of general frame while I had time. I think it kind of expands on some of the thoughts that both you, Simon, and Colin were kind of having. I agree. I think having continuity between the 2 models, there's a lot of value in that. I think it's nice to have a way where you can also be able to label the columns of like stage 1, 2, 3, like, you know, like kind of having like a number assigned to it. I like that in conjunction with also like a word description. So I think that was just done well within the cloud native model. And kind of the way that I was trying to parse out the rows was trying to find a way of like, kind of also in tandem with like, we've got the columns kind of going with like different parts of this life cycle that are constantly going to be improving, optimizing, improving, optimizing. The more you optimize, the more you build, and it kind of goes like it'll kind of end up being sort of like a circular process. I thought kind of similarly about the rows, like first, before you strategize anything, you need to have some type of investment, and then you need to figure out, well, what's my plan? And then from the plan, how do I actually enact the plan? After I've enacted the plan, how do I have the stakeholders adopt this plan? Now that we've got the stakeholders involved, how do we get feedback? So kind of having some type of like loop. And I was having a really good conversation with Marsh yesterday concerning even like just the social aspect of this, because behind all of this stuff and the things that we're trying to accomplish, there's like there's some type of like why that's kind of underpinning. And like there's a goal. We're not just trying to do things and throw things at a board, you know, and hope something sticks. There's something that we're trying to achieve within social interactions, whether we're trying to reduce cognitive load or whatever it is. So I think all that being said, having some type of like frame of like kind of from start to finish, how do we accomplish this why? And like, how do we continually build on it? I think is something that there's just a lot of value in. So the comment I was going to make on yours, Abby, that kind of aligns with what I'm saying here is, oh shoot, what was it? Dang, I had an idea. It's gone. That's okay. Oh, there you go. Yeah, I remember now. Thank you. So the idea was, I really like that you separated out the provider and the consumer. I think there's a lot of value in that, because they really are just kind of two separate perspectives. But I also kind of struggle with it because they're naturally intertwined with one another. And it's at its core, and that's why it's nice that they're sort of like right next to each other like that. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly how I like this. I don't know how it fit into what I've got, but yeah, I just wanted to comment and say I thought it was just really good.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like when you're at a retro and people change the format on you all of a sudden. You can still write the same, you can still write the same ideas, it's just with what angle you're writing them, right? So
Exactly.
like all of these 5 things matter from both perspectives, but which one is more invested in the outcome was sort of where I made the split, and it was a bit arbitrary maybe, but yeah. Robert, what's up? What are you thinking?
First of all, I would say that I really like how you took some of the kind of like from the last meeting, the category names that were kind of like strongest. I think it makes sense to have it like this. Feedback is the only one that I'm a little bit like iffy on, just simply because what does that actually mean? And it's kind of like it doesn't necessarily like scream out this is exactly what we're talking about in itself. But the idea of going from investment and downwards and the way that you describe it, I think also makes a lot of sense. And I think we should have it like that. Because we need to start somewhere, and it's usually with, there's no point of starting to the strategy part if we can't afford the time or people. And then you need a set of strategy before you implement. Like, it makes sense when you think about it, at least. And then besides that, I think I'm again a little iffy on the words when it comes to the levels, just because again, it's like, it's hard to find. I'm not sure what the right answer is. Let's just keep on crapping on everyone else's attempts. But it's like, it's really hard to figure out what means starting and progressing, and what is the end goal. Like, you could optimize your templated solution, while it might not be people going into a portal or using a CLI tool, which I think is better than, you could still optimize that. These words are hard to land in a way that makes sense, that it's a progression, that you're going from, the least amount of time and money and people investment until you have something that is mature. So I don't have an answer to that. I just have complaints, I guess.
I think naming is an open question. It's going to stay an open question, but this is like, I don't think you should feel bad about having complaints or questions. Just to say for everybody, like, we are going to be wordsmithing, and my hope to come out of this meeting is that we have enough alignment where if I were to wipe out the model that's on the main page right now and replace it with something, the thing we're worrying about is wordsmithing, and not like fundamentally what are we trying to get across.
Yeah.
And then go ham on the wordsmithing. Like, absolutely, like, just to be clear, whatever comes out of this meeting is not a final thing. It's about trying to reduce the surface area of where our discussion is, right? Is like, get to the point where we're all on the sort of the same page, and it's really just like, we know what we want that word to mean. We don't yet know what the right word is for it to mean that. And that's where I would like to hopefully get to.
And also, just before you take over, Simon, just For some reason, still in my brain, it makes sense to have levels 1 to 5, just because you could say it's okay to not necessarily get up to level 5.
Hmm.
You know, it's easier in my brain to see that, like, it's from not having anything that's related to a platform to having a full solid, like, shiny golden path, not golden path, that means a different thing here, but you know, a golden platform. This is like this nirvana or whatever you want to call it. That's like the end goal, and what that means to you, you know, and your organization differs. It might be that for strategy you don't need to get across a certain level because that's where you're at. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, try to find a word, but like, again, like, the words just then give a meaning to each level that is hard to balance in that aspect. Like, you don't necessarily have to be level 5, but that might be the word that you're going for. You know, if you know what I mean. Like, it's just hard to put words on the levels.
Can I take a crack at that? I think what I heard from you just now is that there's this sort of concept of the perfect or the golden platform that is forever out of reach, and the question is, where are you going to draw a line in your pursuit of that? Is that close to what you're saying?
More or
did I miss
less.
the point? Okay.
Right. And the reason why I'm thinking that is because I was on a podcast recording today, and we were talking about IDPs and stuff like that, and we were talking about how, you know, what is an internal developer platform? What is a platform? Well, it depends on who you're asking and what they're trying to do with that platform and what kind of capabilities do they need, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like there's us having something that describes the perfect platform in the end might not necessarily, like, if you get to level 5 on all of these, then you have, you know, the perfect platform setup. Doesn't make sense to me. Like,
can I riff on that also? Because to me, it seems like there's a point at which there are diminishing returns on investment. Like, you just can't justify that kind. So even though you could imagine a better world, there, organizationally, it doesn't make sense to fund that versus other things you're doing.
right.
I think you reach a limit.
If you only have technical people who know how to deal with Kubernetes manifests, why do you need to implement an API for people to interact with your platform if you can just put it into Git and use GitOps? Like, it doesn't make sense to kind of like spend that time.
Yeah, I have another one. Like, in the begin, if you have particularly when you're small and you've got a good shared sense of what your API design style is, you don't need to have a API design standard established, right? As long you can accomplish that culturally by indoctrinating people as they join the team. Or if you're a large organization that didn't grow up in that way, you may need to shape that over time.
Yeah, so it's like it all differs from, like, if you have 5 developers and that's the entire team, and you're all aware of how stuff works, or if you have 200 developers and you're the platform engineering team. Like, there's a difference in those two scenarios that, you know, reflects back to the fact that, like, leveling all the way up on each category doesn't necessarily make sense.
I have tried to capture that. So I'm going to cut in only because we're nearing the time of some people having to come off the call, and I want to make sure we open up the last of the ones here from John. I have captured, though, like, can the paper that the model gets delivered with somehow help people identify where within the model is right for them, which will help also reinforce that the top of the model doesn't equate to success. Like, if we can try and do that. So we're trying to narrow in on what is the model, and then we're going to have to also narrow in on what is the paper associated with the model. And I think this is like an open question on if that paper can include that. So just to try and capture. But yeah, John, I don't know if you want to try and share some of your thinking behind this.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so first off, I really like the format and the structure that you came up with, Abby. So I kind of just copy pasted that. And I think, you know, maybe not for presentation so much, but at least for organizing and structuring this, I think that makes a lot of sense to have it like this. As I said, I also like the platform and or the platform consumer versus provider side of things. But yeah, basically I just went tabula rasa on it and tried to like think, from like a make things as concise as possible, but also using the reference of what we already had. And you can see that I already caught myself once with maintainability. As I was going through that and thinking about it, it started to seem like it might be a little bit synonymous with the improvement buy-in. So yeah, it's basically just kind of another take or different, I guess, different rows in some ways. Like I took and kind of smashed together the, what was it? The user experience and the integration. So I merged those into one, essentially, as just usability. I also so there's maintain the new one, I guess, would be like universality, which you can see I made a quick note about that down there. Like, what do we mean exactly by platform, and like what does that encompass? And you'll see that I was still thinking about that because they're blank. And also take this with a grain of salt because I kind of just started working on this morning. I really kind of meant it as a draft to just kind of like throw my ideas out there without just have a place to organize them without stepping on anyone else's toes. Yeah, I do like the idea of having progression as far as the rows are concerned. So I put a quick note down there when we were discussing that, how in this case, I think I would swap usability and advocacy. Also, I kind of went, you can think of it as like from like internal and like on a per need basis to just internal across the entire company to external and then like coupled. So these kind of like starting words for the categories in row 1 kind of span down to all of the columns. And also in looking at it, it really kind of goes well with the cloud native model terms for build, operate, scale. And then in this case, I'd say improve and optimize would kind of be lumped into category 4 or row or column 4. And so yeah, that's basically all I have.
Cool. One thing that I definitely am seeing, and I don't think I called it out correctly elsewhere, is like Vishal asked the question, what is the right number of rows to make this consumable by people? And we've had that discussed as a part of the CNMM, the cloud native maturity model. Like there's a lot of like ways in which you can traverse it. There's a lot of aspects to it. We have had proposals that have both 4 and 5 columns, 4 or 5 levels. And so just something I've realized that like that was not something we've talked about on like, do we want 3 levels? Do we want 5 levels? Do we want 4 levels? Like is maybe something that has come up as like a option, but that's all. But what else has people noticed that they want to call out as characteristics that they would want to see flow through to the final model, or open questions this has come up in their heads by looking at it?
I just wanted to echo, I really like how we're calling out the 2 persona types. I think I'm absolutely, everyone else is saying that too. And I wanted to say that, but we talk about leveraging the platform as a way to build like continuity in your teams and to streamline and give folks something to work on together. And I think that's missing from the cloud native maturity model a little bit, but it shouldn't be in the cloud native maturity model. This is more of okay, you need a strategy now. If you're at this level in the cloud native maturity model, you've started there. This could be something you could follow to achieve some specific goals. And then this is kind of creating a roadmap for that by calling out people specifically. And so I really, 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 really like that we're doing that.
Just want to call out and like, so to build on that, because there's a lot of noddings and a lot of thumbs up, which is great. So this was something that only came out because I think we tried it to clean slate. So this is what I was hoping to get out of this. We've gotten now new ideas around visualization. We've gotten new ideas around ordering of our aspects. Like I feel like there are a few things that we didn't talk about last time, despite how much we deep dived into the model that have come out because people have been able to think fresh, which I think is awesome. So just extending on the persona thing, are these the two personas we want? Are there more personas we want to talk about? Should we be treating them equally, as in, should we be aiming to have a similar number of things per persona? Or like, yeah, is there anything that we want to say? So yes, we want to keep with personas. Is there anything else people want to say when it comes to personas? I just want to give space to.
I don't think one needs more than 2 personas, because first of all, it starts getting, there would be a lot of stuff in this table at that point. I think platform provider and platform consumer works just because no matter where you're at in like the organization for, or if you're in charge of the people who are creating platforms, or if you're in charge of the people consuming it, doesn't make sense. Like there's no reason to split out or anything like that. If we're gonna do 2 personas, I would say that if we get more than 4 categories on the platform provider side and more than 3 categories on the platform consumer side, it's gonna be a big table. If we have, I think we could get down to 4 categories on the platform provider side. Again, because of overlapping within certain aspects of this. And for platform consumer side, like if it's 1 or 2 categories, I think we can't do more than that. It will be just a big chunk of stuff.
Cool.
If I may, I have and I got to jump in a second. In the API management world, we think of API producers, API consumers, and then there's another role, which is the platform team, who is enabling those golden paths for producers, and what tooling do producers need also to manage their API, the relationships with their API consumers. And so I'm a little wary of the word consumer here, because for me, consumer has a specific instance, but that's colored by my experience and the thing I think about all the time, which is APIs. Provider makes more sense to me. It feels like there's a service the platform team is providing to teams in a company or in an organization. So I don't think of them as consumers. They're definitely users of the platform. They're the people who are leveraging the service. So I don't know how to reconcile it. It's just that for me was the awareness there's a collision when I have to talk about how these things intersect.
If it's platform provider,
yeah.
Platform provider and platform user, does that make more sense to you? Because it kind of makes more sense to me.
Good. I can that solves my problem, but I don't like, I'm a weird edge case in this probably. So but I like platform user better.
Yeah, because platform user doesn't necessarily say that you're consuming a service. You might be, you could be having insight into it, or you could have, et cetera, et cetera. You're just using the platform in various ways.
And it leaves space to represent the consumption relationships, because the relationships between teams. Some teams are going to depend on other teams' services, and we want to leave space for that to be able to represent that relationship.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that.
There's like 3 votes for users and a bunch of nodding heads, and I think user and consumer are like conceptually the same. So I'm quite comfortable saying we've agreed that as a group we think the personas are helpful, and we've agreed as a group that for the names will be provider and user. And again, wordsmithing will ensue, but like I think that's a reasonable start for now. I think that seems great. Thank you for raising the question there, Marsh.
Thanks.
Yeah, we can always define. We definitely will need a section for defining what is a consumer or an end user. And that's a good place to call out, because I think you guys are getting that too. Sometimes the end users will also be collaborators. And I'm not throwing extra words in there too, but for many folks, the platform team will be made up of both end users and the platform team and the producer. So I think the definitions will nail that down. Or we could have a high level user, 2 user types, producer and end user, or provider and end user, and then define subtypes. Again, wordsmithing.
Cool.
Just my engineering mind, instead of provider, would builder work better?
I'm sorry, builder?
Instead of provider, like builder and user, because technically some of the app teams will end up being part of the building process in a way, but also be a user. And provider has a very different connotation, usually like a service provider or a managed service provider in that sense. Again, just showing what I think.
And I think that's why provider makes sense in this case, because we are providing a service. You might be invited in to help build some aspect of that service, but someone is responsible for, you know, for the provider part of this.
Fair point. Yeah.
I
So,
also think
yeah.
it's also important to know that like provider doesn't have to be a 100% allocated platform team. Like you may be a provider of a service that is operating at like level 1, whatever we call it, in a lot of ways, because you're sort of just ad hocly, and again, that might not be the name of the thing, but like you're sort of voluntarily providing something of service versus it being like you're a provider at a more mature level because you actually have like a stable of things that you're providing as a service, and that's like your entire job, right? And this is where I think there was a model that I want to say, oh, who was that? Somebody just wrote a blog post about this where like the idea is like platform teams basically emerge through like a team creating something for themselves and then other teams asking them for it, and then eventually that thing needs to become platformized. And that's where like that's where I think one of the really good parts about the current intro to the paper, while that's not what we're currently discussing, I know that in there it talks about the fact that this model can be applied not just per organization, not just per team, but it can even be like discussed per like kind of offering or like, you know, capability, because you may have certain capabilities that are offered by a team that is operating at one level of maturity and certain capabilities offered by a different team at different levels of maturity, and that's okay.
I got an off the wall thought that might tie some things together. We talked about needing a responsibility matrix or having a responsibility matrix as part of that. This sounds a lot like something that we could tackle in like a sample responsibility matrix.
Yeah,
And
that's
map
the one
back
that
to
I
like
couldn't
who's
get out of my
responsible for
head.
different parts of this. Yeah.
Yeah. Couldn't get out of my head that was like a thing that I think like, but that is an implementation. So I don't like that it's in the table in my description, but I think that it could end up being to I think it was someone's point, I forget who now. Somebody said, oh, it'll be good if we can give people like ways to evaluate themselves against these topics. Like you may be using these tools or you may be using these techniques if you're in this box. I think we want to keep those as much as we can out of the title of the box, so that as like those tools and techniques evolve and grow and improve, like the boxes have more durability than the tools that people use. And that's where I feel uncomfortable with the fact I put responsibility matrix on the table, but like I think it
that's
would
just
be
a thing.
within somewhere. Yeah, exactly. Cool. So all right, so here's the notes that I have, right? This is where we're at on notes. I think it'd be good to, you know, make sure I've captured what people care about around characteristics we want in the final model. If anyone feels like there's one missing or one has snuck on there that you wouldn't expect, that'd be a good thing to call out. Same thing with, you know, open questions. If you feel like there's things that you feel like need to be debated still, that aren't captured here, that'd be good things to add, or things that you thought we were clear on that I've put under open questions, like call it out. Maybe we're clearer than I realized. That'd be cool. And then, yeah, so I'm gonna actually leave that. So I'd like to get consensus with the group that's still here on like the characteristics we have captured or what people would have expected from the conversation so far, and that the things that we still think need a fair amount of ironing out are captured under still open questions. And if they aren't, please do shout.
Abby, in the document at one point, we did discuss something about a success criteria. So if you're in a particular cell, so at the intersection of a row and a column, what does success for that particular characteristic at that level look like? So is that something we want to include, or is that asking a bit much for the maturity model? I wanted to get because I personally like the idea of having that called out, but it might not be possible or practical. But if the group here has some strong opinions, either for or against, it'll just help me alleviate that open question in my head.
Yeah, does anyone else want to share their opinions on that? So I think what you're saying, let me see if I understand the question, and then hopefully people will understand with me. What you're suggesting is like the sort of added content that you have on your slides, and that we have that is very out of date now, but sort of below the model right now on the original model. It's the idea of like a bit more detail to like kind of clarify the box, but it sounds like you're also proposing even more specifically, not just detail, but a success criteria check. Like, I'm achieving this because I can like validate this, like test
Correct.
turns green kind of thing. Okay. Yeah. What do people think?
In itself, I don't have any strong opinions for or against it. The only thing that I'm like, it needs to be addressed outside of the table itself, or we need to be able to present this in as easy way as possible and have all that type of information in one go, and then we could deep dive and then start talking about those type of things. It's again something that it's kind of hard to define a successful anything in this case if we're trying to not say that there's one right answer. Like, how do we how do you define that something is done in this case? Some of them might make sense, some of them might be hard to figure out. So I'm a little bit hesitant, because we might end up saying that we want to do something like that, and then we start getting categories where we can't really find that exit and find this is like define that, if that makes sense.
I think that's one of my biggest concerns as well. So I think both your points I agree with a lot. I think we absolutely need the detailed section. Like, I would agree with that statement of like that's separate from the table, but like useful. And then the question is like, how do we do that detailed section? Like, does it create a tick boxy type exercise or not? I think I have to admit, as a former consultant, a recovering consultant, I do get worried about tick boxes, about us as the model creators assigning tick boxes to things, because I think that it will drive the culture of this as a way to like evaluate and judge people versus as a way for people to like identify and grow, right? Which I think has been the like tone that we've had. But I don't know. That's
Yeah,
Simon,
we
what's
need
up?
to intentionally leave room for interpretation and gray area. And then that's a great way, like letting other people say how they did this or how they achieved this is a great way for vendors to participate and other folks too. And I have the same feeling about getting over defining on the personas as well, because different teams are going to have different role types and different people and different capabilities. And like, I don't want somebody to think I need to hire this type of person because I need X or whatever, right? It's my soapbox.
Yeah, if I just wanted to say I really agree with Colin's points there. Around first off on the defining the personas too strictly, and then one of the things that we set out with the cloud native maturity model, there's a couple of things where we wanted to use it as a tool for people to question themselves and to provoke questions rather than to provide strict tick box criteria. So it was to make people think about things. And then I just also wanted to comment briefly around something that might help. When we did the cloud native maturity model, we found, just on the topic of naming, we went back and did it. I bring this up because the middle category scale was one that came about actually a bit later on through the process, because what we found as we were working through the model was that we got this messy middle stage where people are often building a lot of tech. We also came at it from probably from perhaps quite a bias from larger organizations. And so what I wanted to bring that out was we almost had to, that nomenclature came much later. And then the second thing was that the last two columns were very difficult to nail down, and almost particularly the last one was a bit of a North Star to raise your eyes towards whatever is there, but is it ever actually specifically attainable? So now we're, whether that's the right approach, we're not, we'll see. But I wanted to bring those up, and to some degree, they're still really open questions within the cloud native maturity model too. Yeah, that was all.
Yeah, I've got that one down as the open question of like, is it clear that the top level isn't necessary for everyone? And also, is there like an end, is it an end goal? Like, is it a North Star, or is it, do we leave that open? Like, I think that that's still, I would agree. That's an open question, I think, for all these models of all time, and like hard one to get to an answer on.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're at just over an hour in. We've got about 45 minutes to go. I, again, am very like energized and encouraged by the alignment we're getting on our intentions. And I feel like if I look at our still open questions, I think one of the things that maybe we can tackle in this 40-minute period is narrowing in on what are the aspects that we want to address in the model. The reason I say that is because I look at the still open questions and I look at naming being hard. I look at the number of principles that somebody can remember being a question mark. So like, do we want 4, 8, 6? I don't know. I look at the fact that one of the characteristics we've introduced is this idea of wanting to be able to have progression across our aspects and not just across our levels. And like, that's like a new thing that kind of emerged today. So I look at some of those things and I realize that actually maybe that's an area that has had a fair amount of turmoil, but alignment now. And can we like kind of narrow in on some words there? So that would be my proposal, is that we spend this time. I can copy across basically the different aspects that are in the different tables and into a doc, or try and make them visible to people in some way. And we try and get to a point where we've ironed out, like, here are our X number of things divided across our two personas that we think we would like to include in the model. And then obviously we'll still need to validate the number of levels and the name of the levels across, as well as each cell. But that's my proposal. Anyone see something else they think we could do that would be high value for the next 40 minutes they'd like to propose?
Sounds like a good plan.
You're all on the bus. Let's go. All right. Cool. So as I said, everyone should feel like they're empowered to like open up docs and look at what they want to look at. I think I'm gonna try and grab some of these and like place them in a doc here to try and, so that I don't have to have all the documents open at all times for people to see. Oops. All right, so like that's one, and then that's challenging. There we go. Okay. I had to make it all pretty with consumer, and I think we've talked about that being user, so I can just make that change here. All right. I think I've missed one. There you go. All right, they've all fit on one page. So, yeah, I think what we'll do is, I think we've talked about, we want to maintain the as a provider and as a user. So I'm going to start with those ideas there and consider this a consolidation round. Like, what would you pick out of these or other? Actually, we can take the things that are currently in the maturity model as well. All sorts of words are in there right now that may or may not be useful. Yeah, who would like to advocate for something they'd like to see on the table? And we can go from there.
I think the investment and the improvement buy-in, which I kind of worded that weird, I think those are kind of synonymous. Like, the more I think about it, kind of just the same thing.
So investment, I've got twice. So maybe I'll start a little bit of consolidation even here. Investment, so you're saying investment and improvement buy-in, you think are sort of synonymous, and which,
Yeah, I just kind of worded it differently, but I think it's, same.
cool.
think
I
it-
think that the other ones that are out there that are sort of in the same category maybe would include financial a little bit. Yeah, Colin, I think I saw you on mute. What were you thinking?
Yeah, I was thinking, it depends. Sorry, I got like, we
Sorry.
ordered spicy chicken today. It's killing me. I don't want to get overthinky. I'm getting overthinky, but investment to me, it can mean two different things from depending on like the perspective that you're coming from. I do think it's important to call out like investment or whatever we're calling it is like authorization or buy-in or like the ability from a business level to implement these strategies. And whether that's like hiring people to do it or allocating funds or time to do it or things like that. I think it's still important to call that out.
What I'm hearing from you, I think,
Too, yeah.
is what we use is an advocation for how we set the question associated with investment more so than a proposal against the word investment. If I'm hearing you correctly.
I'm defending, I think, like, I don't know that I personally would consider investment to be the same thing as adoption. But I think that
yeah,
John is totally right that people will think of it as investment, but I also don't want to wordsmith.
I think John, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I think you had said improvement buy-in was where you saw the alignment between investment and improvement buy-in, more so than investment and adoption, which as you say, Colin, there can be definitely a difference in. So
that's correct. And for me, I think I changed the wording just because once again, this is getting into wordsmithing, but to me, like, just investment, I think money, and improvement buy-in. I think, you have the buy-in as far as people like, like how do you get this done as far as time and resources, but really the end goal is improvement of the platform as a whole, rather than like, I mean, the same thing as investment, but I think money whenever I think investment. So that's why I changed it.
Yeah, and what you're saying, John, I'd consider is the same thing as adoption as well. Like, that's an indicator of adoption when you have that buy-in. And I was thinking about, and you've got it coincidentally, like right in the middle there. Adoption to me almost sits in both the provider level and the consumer level.
cool. Talk to me more about that. What do you think? So, where we've had adoption, we've had what can I expect to drive user growth and retention? We have how are the streamline teams discovering and integrating with the platform. We have not in that one.
Yeah, if you go back to the first one that was open.
This one.
So we've got like towards operationalized and thrive at like 3 and 4, we've got provider driven and we've got consumer driven. And we're calling out, you know, consumer right there, and that's still on the provider side. So it's measuring it like from a consumer side, it's are my teams using the platform? Is there adoption? Is there agreement that, you know, I'm a developer and I'm leveraging the platform that was put in place for me versus going rogue or building new things? That's a real thing that happens. And so we could almost articulate, or it could be a layer that's right there in the middle. But adoption will mean different things to a provider versus to a consumer. And it's a provider may measure how many users they have, and a consumer may, from the consumer side, they may measure their willingness to consume to a degree.
That's really interesting. I want to dig into that a little bit more, but I also want to first just say, first of all, I am hearing that everyone's good with investment as long as we make sure that it is clear that it has to do with time and money, not just money, as a word. So I'm gonna give it the good 5 seconds of any concerns. What I'm also hearing is an advocation that adoption gets added to the list. Now, where between platform provider and platform user, we can keep having that conversation. I think that's really interesting. But I just want to call out, like, adoption does seem to be quite consistent across the list, but I'm also seeing things like advocacy. I'm also seeing things like user growth, like the original conversation from like last week. So I just want to call out, like, does adoption sound right to people? Does anyone want to throw some other words out there that they'd rather in lieu of adoption? And then we can talk about if it's, you know, in a middle ground and provider and user, like, separately.
Yeah, I was just saying adoption because that's what you have open in the page on the right hand side.
Sorry, I'm not trying to.
No, that was good.
Yeah.
But those all to me are the same in concept.
Yeah, in looking at mine, where I have advocacy, really, I prefer the word adoption, actually, because, and if you look at that, a lot of it is more about adoption. Like if you look at category or column 4, you know, it establishes a common standard.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool. Then I'm going to start talking as if adoption has been adopted. Shout if people think of a better word. But Colin, I want to dig in a little bit more on the which side it falls on, or does it fall into a middle ground? The reason being that when I think about adoption, I think that it is like air to a user versus it is some, like, as in, like, the user doesn't think about adoption. They're just either doing it or not. Like, it's like either maybe it's not like, yeah, that's a bad thing, but basically, like, from a user's perspective, I don't think about my adoption. I think about, like, I'm using some stuff. I don't think about, like, who else is using this stuff or why am I using this stuff. I'm like, I'm using some stuff that's either useful for me or not useful for me. If it's not useful, I'm probably not using it unless I'm being forced to use it. And then that's part of my adoption story. But, like, versus I think of, like, that, like, the adoption is what drives the investment when it comes from a provider point of view. Like, if you don't get adoption, you don't get investment in a lot of ways. Like, that's a part of your, like, feedback cycle to a certain extent, is that like are people using it? Are you meeting needs, or are you just shoving it at people and making them do it? So that's why I originally proposed it within the provider side of things. I'm not sure that's right, but that was my thinking.
Thinking through a scenario with a group we're working with right now, they have what they call like core IT as a team, but they don't call it platforms. And a lot of the things that core IT is doing touches on platforms, but they don't have a consistent strategy across the board. Like, what they're doing isn't something that the other teams are necessarily actively consuming or aware of, when it absolutely could be. And so they need somebody from the outside to come and say, yes, you should come use the tools that core IT is using, and, like, that should be a platform strategy. And and that kind of thing. And thinking about it, like those other teams should be end users, and they're not at this point, even though the tools are available. And so the measurement that I would do is, are they consuming these tools? Do they agree with and want to use these tools? Are they involved and providing that feedback and contributing to that? And to me, that's their adoption, because like ultimately they could choose to not use the tool at all. It is the job for the producer to make the tools more adoptable and to drive usage, but it's another thing to have the adopters, the end users, actually using, also having skill sets that align with using and consuming and some of those other things.
One of the things I'm hearing
brain dump.
there is like, so the framing of adoption, if it was framed under the platform provider, would be about like encouraging people to want more of a pull from their consumers rather than just always pushing at people. If it was framed under platform user, it might be that we want that ability to have choice is what matters, right?
Yeah,
like a lower level maturity is like I'm stuck with whatever they give me, and a higher level maturity is like I have chosen my provider of choice. And I guess maybe that's why I see it under provider more, is that like if we're doing a platform maturity model to try and support internal teams becoming better providers of platforms, if we put this under user, platform user, if we put adoption under platform user and we make the highest level like full autonomy to pick the best provider at hand, like it doesn't encourage, it doesn't push the internal team to be better. It pushes the internal team to be better, but only like tangentially, as in like they have to be able to read that box and go, oh, they can pick any provider, not just us. Oh, that means we have to be the best provider. And therefore, versus if we like put it under provider, I think we can like be a bit more explicit with people of like, you need to be the best provider because you need to be user pulled rather than like you pushed.
Yeah, it kind of boils down to a little bit like, is there traction? Is there communication? Yeah. Is there consumption? And yeah, the provider can definitely measure that. And that it would be helpful to have a tool that I can go back to somebody and say, yes, the platform is perfect and you're providing all of the tools, but you dummies over here on these other teams are not using it when you should be. And that's almost like a challenge of maturity, but maybe that's cloud native maturity versus platform maturity too.
And that's where we had to try and draw those lines.
I'm arguing against myself, which is nice.
It's always good. If we aren't arguing against ourselves when it comes to this model, we will have done it wrong, because I think none of this is going to be clear cut, obvious. No other options available to us. It's all going to be, reasonable final state, I think, is the best we can hope for. Okay, so
touch on interaction.
Interaction.
Yeah, I see it in the list over here too, but yeah, I think I got my point across there. Is like people can still choose to not use it, and I think if I've got a company-wide platform strategy and I need my teams using the platform and the thing that I've invested in order to show that I'm more mature.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if we could liken this back to vendors and startups and stuff too. They could build the best IDP ever and nobody uses it or buys it. And I don't know, it's like, do we measure like your adoption? Technically, you're advocating, you're doing all the things right, but do we need a measure of like how many people are using it? Is that, I guess that would be, okay, so that's the platform team. They should be measuring that. It's less the ability to consume. It's more like how much is the consumption happening?
Is it about pushing adoption or is it about gaining adoption?
And that is, I think, the conversation we want to have in the maturity conversation, right? So it's like pushing adoption is potentially a stage you might be in that may be acceptable because it takes time to pull adoption, right? Like it's not, pulling adoption is not just standing there and going like, all right, come to me, I'm the best. It's like, it's actually really hard work.
Right,
And
if you're in a corner with your platform, why would the users come to you?
It's a lemonade stand, are they going to come to you? Exactly.
Yeah.
I think, Colin, when you brought up interaction, when I go and I look at interaction, my read of this is that that's actually a synonym or
Oh,
a
that's not
challenge with like things like interface or things like usability or things like user experience, and like those being some of the words we've used in that space, friction reduction and streamlining and
Right.
things. What's a word, what out of that pile of words? And I think that where that's coming in is from the user's perspective. My user's perspective of like, I have this level of blank, I have this level of usability, I have this type of interaction, I have this type of interface, I think is coming from the users, like what are the users feeling and seeing? So what is the word that if we were to, I'm proposing we think up a word that would fit under platform user, but if you'd like to propose one under platform provider, please do as well. But what word would capture those things? I think, as I say, we've got, let me duplicate this so we can see the full list over on the side here. There you go. So that's the list of like all the words that are across all of our different things. And we're trying to think up what's the one that we, and feel free to grab one that's not on that list if you think there's something that fits a bit better. Robert, you got to come up with a word. You can't just tell everyone else's words are bad. What's the word you think fits best for this?
I'm so tired. I only have Norwegian words, so I don't want that.
Fair.
Okay,
fair,
I'm
fair.
going to propose interface for
Okay.
this. Let's start
Interface.
there.
Awesome. I know it's on here somewhere. I know I've seen it. All right, interface.
Under
Interface.
platform
Yep.
user in the middle,
Interface.
yeah.
Interface. Yep, we've got that a few places. So interface and the things that we've been seeing under interface are sort of around like, what are the like mechanisms in which you receive a service? Like, is it about an API? Is it about a set of documents? Is it a template kind of thing? We're also seeing, that one doesn't have that. We're also seeing like, yeah, like templates, APIs. For interface here, I think it was under interaction. So this one's like, is it manual? Is it automated? Is it curated? Sort of that sort of a thing. So how do people feel about interface for those types of topics?
Are these things that are available to the end user, or are these things that the end user does?
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. Is this options that the users have, or is this what they should be doing?
I think, is this options or what they should be doing? I
Can
don't
you
know.
go back to the table?
Yep. This is another, or this one.
Yeah.
Oop, bit aggressive on zooming. Sorry. There you go. So I think that so I can speak to the one I wrote, and I think Ram, you might be able to speak to the one you wrote around interactions as well. My thinking, how do I consume things? So it's like when I want a database, or I want a brand new service spun up, or I want something like, am I going to a wiki and following some instructions? Am I grabbing a Helm chart and forking it? Am I pinging an API and getting back some like usable data from that API, which is different than picking an API and getting a like templated thing out? It's like an API indicates there's something running behind the API. Am I like able to sort of grab bag and like compose my own, or in like in a way that is more bespoke to me? So like I can follow the easy path, the easy button path, but I can also like go off piste only slightly, like, and be a bit more. Yeah, that was what those 4 levels were. But again, I don't want to I personally don't want to try and get the 4 levels correct, or 4 or 5 levels correct here. It's more like those are like the types of things we were talking about. I think, Ram, you had similar, like reading docs and being on Slack and things versus like the ability to sort of get some things given to you in an automated way versus having a bit more of a like curated experience versus it being like, you know, completely smooth and like easy interactions. I think I spoke more about the mechanism maybe, and you spoke a bit more about the experience, if I were to like compare and contrast. But
Right. I imagine this to define what the user experience would be when interacting with the platform itself. So does the user have to do ABC in order to accomplish X? Does the user have to go through a particular set of commands in order for an outcome Y to happen? And what is the nature of the experience that the user has when they consume the platform necessarily? Are they doing a bunch of manual steps, or are they having a more black box kind of experience with the ability to step in and out whenever they want to? Or, you know, it's just a fully automated experience where developers continue to develop, test locally, ship it, whatever. So
and I think that was something that when we were talking about this on the last call, friction reduction, streamlining, those words were kind of coming up as well. Not that they were the
Right.
you know anyone's perfect
Yeah,
words
yeah.
for the column, but those were things people were talking about.
No,
So
I think all of those aspects, this term for me would encompass all of those aspects. I don't necessarily want to leave them out.
and you were advocating for interface, and the thing you
Yeah.
wanted to make sure we did is that like that this would include the level of like friction reduction a user would feel in the system, as well as
Among
the
other things, yes.
mechanisms used, like to gain that improvement, basically. Just trying to capture the like intention of the word, and then we can always
Yeah,
change the word and like.
But
Yeah.
I'm kind of coming back to if that is the platform provider's responsibility rather than this is what the platform user needs. Like or
Mm.
like how mature are you as a platform provider, and how mature is your platform based on how do you interact with this platform versus if you're a user and you only have, you know, templates laying around and you have to deal with that, that is not because you are a user, that's because the providers haven't provided anything better.
Yes, and so I guess this is calling into so what I hear from that is calling into question, I think, whether or not we want to split the model into the 2 categories. The reason why I say that, everyone seemed very keen on that, but the reason why I think that this challenges that that feeling, that positive feeling towards it, is that maybe it's that like as a platform provider, it's like it's not it's like platform users experience, right? So it's like the reason it was originally split, the reason that I started with that split, and I know that John like riffed on it, is because I was thinking like there are things that like I feel like I as a platform builder would be encouraged to work hard on if I was more in the shoes of the user. And there are things that as a platform provider, I'm more encouraged from my own shoes. So like from my own shoes, I want to know that the company values the work I'm doing and therefore pays me well and gives me the time and space to be effective. But like my users don't give a crap about that. But my users care deeply about like what their experience is and friction reduction. And if I can, and the value in calling out that that's from the user's perspective might encourage readers of the model to like, that maybe hadn't been as user driven before, to like realize that they're doing these, like this entire paper is for providers, just to be clear. Like we're writing a model for providers of platforms. But if we can somehow phrase that part of this model is like encouraging and almost forcing those providers to think from the perspective of the user.
But if that kind of makes sense. But at the same time, if we're creating a maturity model for the platform provider, and for me, it becomes a thing where the user will not be maturing, in a sense. The user will use the platform. It's the platform that needs to be more mature. So you know, the pressure might come from the users for certain aspects. It might come from leadership. It might come from the people who are creating platforms. Like where that comes from doesn't really matter. It is, for me, in the perspective of the platform maturing. I don't necessarily think we need to split that up as in user and provider. I think it all kind of ties in together in different aspects in different categories. So it's it just makes it hard then to say this is from a user perspective, because the user, like platform engineering is all about like that product focus and making sure that, you know, you have your users, even though there are internal users, and you have to make sure that they get what they need. That doesn't mean that the users are in itself like pushing maturity forward. You can get feedback from them, and then you would have to make a decision based on it, how you're supposed to solve this. It's basically all from the provider's perspective in that sense.
Yeah, so I think that's a good conversation, because that, as I say, that is like very, very valid, but also slightly like we were exploring whether or not it made sense to split this from the different perspectives. I've done a slight edit to suggest that maybe something like platform provider experience cluster of topics versus platform user experience cluster of topics might be a way of making sure that it's a bit clearer that this is all platform providers' job, but that some of their job might influence their own lives more or less than their users' lives more or less. And maybe that's a middle ground. I don't know. I see a lot of nodding and questions from Simon and Colin.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm thinking, I'd propose that we drop end user altogether from the maturity model on this phase, and consider it more, limit the scope there, and just call out that we're focused on the platform provider, and move considerations for the end user to outcomes of the aspect. Like as a result of this, your end users can, if we need to clarify that into different sections.
Okay, I'm just moving. So what I just did, if you weren't following, is I moved, we had talked about, we wanted to split the model into personas, and that was something that we had kind of said was we wanted that in the final one. As we're challenging ourselves to think about that in practice, we're realizing maybe that's more of an open question and maybe less of a definitive. So I've just moved that down.
I'm actually, what I'm kind of saying is like not necessarily drop that concept of having like platform maturity from an end user perspective, but just for the sake of the scope of this first version even, and just consciously calling out and saying this first revision is focused on the provider. Like I want to acknowledge, I do think that having a measured maturity for the consumer is a valuable thing from that perspective, but yeah, it's creating too many questions. So I'm not saying that we should renege on the or like back off of the.
But we can write that into the details instead of it being on the table itself. Is what I maybe hearing.
It's like,
so,
hey, this is for platform providers today. This is not like you'll see stuff for the end users, and that will be an outcomes, and that like comes in like the motivations of the maturity model, and then that gives us something. I'm thinking of product development, like We're maybe we consciously say this needs to be in version 1.5 to include more
Right.
information about the users. I don't know if anyone else.
I would agree with Colin's points there. Something that occurs to me is that often this interplay between the users of the platform and the providers of the platform is so often dictated by a wider policy or decision as well. And the scope in general of the platform maturity model, I wonder if at this point that's almost too big for that. So I would support Colin's proposal. I think it's really valuable to take the user experience into account, and it could go into the more descriptive text. So I would support that.
Cool. So we're starting to create a list here, and right now we have investment, adoption, and interface. One of the reasons why I thought this was an interesting topic to raise now is because we talked about wanting like a progression through these. Do people feel like these are in the correct order right now? Or would they move investment, adoption, interface into a different order if we were to start trying to order these before we add more to the list?
I think they're in the correct order.
I think so too.
2-3 votes. Cool. All right. Awesome. Then, so we have said that we don't want more than 7. We don't know how many we want. Throw out another one. Who's got one? And where would you put it in the list as well? And I'll pull up the list of, where are you? Where'd you go? Notes from discussion. There you are. All right. These are the ones that have been talked about previously, but we can come up with a new name as well.
Can you, by chance, Abby, so I wish I had this open, I'm sorry, can you flip to the table where you think again?
Yep.
Can you flip to the previous?
Yep.
Sorry.
Oh, maybe. I intend to.
I mean,
I think
I'm kind of impartial to what you already have in the draft, and it's probably just because I've read it so many times.
so. I think that so things that I would like to see from my version somewhere, that doesn't mean with these words or not combined in some other ways. I think there is something around these two, this ownership and maintenance, around this idea of like, because I think I really where I was riffing off of on this was a conversation a couple weeks ago, or like last week, when we were talking about like inner sourcing and how that's quite a mature model, but like, you know, there's like centralized, there's inner sourcing, and like how do new features get absorbed into something that is a more mature platform that maybe starts as like someone going a bit off piste and like doing a thing because it's a bit different from what everyone else wants. So I think there's something in that space, whether or not it's these words, I don't know, but like that I think is valuable. The word that's not on here that I think is most valuable that I've seen on others is, I think, this idea of feedback, I think, is a really good one as well. I really like, and especially if what we're saying is like, but then that causes the question, that whole idea of like, which perspective are we going on, user versus provider and that stuff. But I think that's a word that I feel like I definitely, like when I saw it, was like, oh yeah, that's missing from the one that I started to put together. So
I like the idea of feedback. Again, not sure about the word. But if we start thinking about it through this kind of like loop sensibility, that, you know, you got investment for it, and then you plan a strategy and then you implement it, then it's getting adopted. And then you get feedback, and then you need to change something, and then you kind of have to go back. You know, can we invest more time, energy, money, whatever, in getting that? And so you kind of start over again. So it kind of becomes like a meta thing for me, where you can look at like traversing those categories as going from the immature point to your mature, but at the same time you kind of also can look at like a continuous improvement cycle. So I like how that kind of works.
I only worry like, what is it that's about mature for the so I like it as in like, I think people need to be getting feedback, but is feedback actually a like characteristic along the journey, or is it a thing that evolves over time? Like, I think in some ways, this is where I think in some ways, like this idea of like how we talk about adoption is in some ways feedback. How we talk about like how new things are provided to the provided via the platform is in some ways feedback. Like, so that's where I'm like sort of at two minds with it. Cause I really love the word, but then I'm wondering, is it an aspect in itself, or is it fed into the rest of it? I don't know.
And you might look at it as this is the platform maturity model, not necessarily platform engineering maturity model, where feedback is very important if you're doing platform engineering, because it is a product mindset and you need to be, get your feedback from your customer, and then, etc. Is this a, call it physical, it's not physical, it's virtual, but is this a physical platform maturity model, or is this a organizational strategy adoption model?
I think I put that under open questions because I don't think we're going to answer that in 4 minutes, but I think that like it's going to be, it is socio-technical in nature. The question is where does it fall on that scale? I think is the thing where we're not going to be able to answer that in 4 minutes, but I think it's a really interesting question. What I think, what I'd like to answer. Yeah, go on.
Oh, sorry.
No,
sorry,
go for
I
it.
thought you finished.
Please.
No, I was just thinking if that feedback aspect was more of a binary thing as opposed to having like multiple levels. You either have an avenue for receiving feedback and act on it, or you don't. And that really dictates what the kind of maturity is that the platform practice has.
And that actually brings us back towards sort of this one that was on the original model, or like the model that we were talking about, where it's like reactive versus responsive versus strategic and evolutionary and platform as a product kind of side of things. What I'd like to understand from the people on the call still is what I'd like to do. One of my goals coming out of this call was to get to a point where this model that's on this page, which is right now, I would argue unconsumable. I'd like to make it consumable, but what that's going to require is like basically deleting it along with the comments that are on it, because that's the way that Google Docs works, and replacing it with something. And that's a very heavy-handed action. And so I only want to take that action if and when the group feels like we have enough alignment and enough confidence that the thing that would be replacing it would be a step forward. It's not about it being perfect. It's not about it being above reproach or without, wordsmithing to be done and all those things. But do we feel like as a group that if I were to take on the notes that we've captured here about what we want in the final model, the things we still know are open questions, the words we know we've already sort of agreed on and the order that they're in, but then expanded that and introduced a few others, possibly even just leaving those 3, possibly introducing some others, do people feel like that's a reasonable step forward, or does that feel like too much of a leap right now, and that it would create too much of a rift between like the conversations that are happening and the reality of the document? I don't want to create dissonance there.
If we, instead of removing something from the document, rather have a table document specifically, where these 3 get added, and then we have somewhere where we can kind of work on that model for next time, I think makes more sense than just removing what's
So
there,
maybe
because there's a lot of historical
yeah
value.
So maybe
Yeah.
what I can do is so taking that on board, maybe what I can do is I can like basically cross all this out. So like, I can undo it, right? So I can do it here. You can tell me if it looks stupid and then I can undo it. Strike through it. Put a whip with a link to somewhere else. And then have that somewhere. So that way we don't lose the historic, but we sort of make it clear to people coming to the document that this is not meant to be consumable as it is. And then what I can do is we can create a new document. I can take on board the things that we've talked about here and create that document from that. Make that the like high traffic editable thing, or changeable thing, commentable thing. And then we can look to try and merge that back in on the next time we get a call together. Does that seem like a reasonable? I'm seeing a nod at least from Robert. So that Colin, yep. Does that seem reasonable to people? Simon. So the thanks John, thanks Rom. So the question then becomes, is it a Google Doc or is it a Google Sheet? I think I'm going to advocate we do a doc. I think it provides more flexibility for commenting. If anyone feels otherwise, let me know. But that's gonna be my next action then, is then in the next day or so, I'll create a doc with this format, but with a like clean version, taking on board all of our conversations as much as I possibly can. But again, I'm one human. I probably misunderstood people. I'm probably going to miss things. So please, comment frequently and completely on it. So the point, and then we'll look to maybe revisit this in another about a week, maybe a little bit more than a week. I don't know if I'm gonna have time for a call next week, so probably 10 days from now instead of 7. We'll look to schedule something in. So
I think it makes more sense to have in a doc, because you could even basically just select a word, and
exactly.
add comments based on something you disagree with. So
yeah, and John, yeah, I agree. Cool. Yes. All right, then. Yeah, we're 2 minutes over already 2-hour conversation. I super appreciate the engagement. Like, I think the only way we get through like are able to get as much community involvement and as positive an experience with the model at the end is to get everybody involved. And so that's why these are sometimes long conversations, but I think very, very worthwhile. Personally, I find it really interesting to hear everyone's perspective. So yes, please. Yeah. Thank you. I will try and do this, and then please come comment and wordsmith away, and we'll get to the best possible outcome. So
Thank you, Abby.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Abby.
thanks
awesome.
everyone.
Bye y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.